Late in the afternoon, just as an unseasonably cool wind began rattling the shutters of the old house, Adrienne caught her reflection in the dusty mirror beside the front door. She felt a dull ache in her chest at the realization of what she was about to face. The house had once shone with warmth, laughter, and the promise of unity between two families who had agreed to merge their lives under one roof. But now, the corridors seemed haunted by cold echoes and stifled resentments that had accumulated over time, each year adding another unspoken slight or quiet sabotage to a growing pile of wounds. She let her fingertips brush against the faded floral wallpaper. In the early days of her marriage, she had tried to see the charm in every detail, tried to believe that this sprawling place could become the safe harbor she'd always dreamed of. She had overlooked the way certain doors stuck in the frames, how the floors groaned with each step as if sharing in her burden. She had even overlooked the initial hostility from her mother-in-law, Elaine, convincing herself that all people needed was a little goodwill and patience to learn how to coexist. Yet the hostility never ceased. In whispers and rumors, in pointed remarks, in scrupulous control of finances and downright humiliation in front of visiting relatives, Elaine made it clear that Adrienne was unwelcome. There was a time Adrienne would have shrunk from confrontation, would have tried even harder to stay in the background, always serving, always hoping that a patient heart would eventually soften any callousness. But that time was gone. She had already filed for divorce from Michael. The marriage that began with illusions of love had deteriorated under the weight of broken promises, manipulation, and Michael's growing indifference to the slow destruction of Adrienne's sense of belonging. Elaine, in her own controlling manner, had never stopped fueling that slow destruction, pushing Adrienne to question her every right to be in this house. Standing at the threshold now, Adrienne could sense the tension humming in the air. Elaine was waiting beyond one of those yawning doorways, no doubt. She had summoned Adrienne for what was supposed to be a final discussion, though Adrienne anticipated only venom and blame. In her handbag lay a single sheet of paper, the official decree finalizing her divorce, which confirmed her intention to move out once she could secure a new place. She might have left already, but half the funds needed to rent a decent apartment were tied up in the final arrangements with Michael, who remained evasive and taciturn, like a locked gate that only opened when he saw fit. At first, Adrienne had assumed Elaine's invitation to talk signaled some readiness for peace, but she knew better than to expect sincerity. Over the years, she had watched Elaine systematically isolate and manipulate those close to her. Sweet words to a visitor, lavish praise bestowed in public, gifts delivered on birthdays with an imposing flourish. All of it was a subtle game of strings. Elaine pulled them as she saw fit, expertly maneuvering whoever stood in her way. Adrienne had once been too naive to notice. Then she was too timid to protest. Now she was neither naive nor timid, and this sudden request for a conversation set her on edge. When she finally stepped inside, she found Elaine perched in the living room, wearing a sharp expression that was meant to pass as a pleasant smile. The curtains were half drawn, and the dull light illuminated her mother-in-law's meticulously arranged hair, a hallmark of her pride. She beckoned Adrienne to come closer, an eyebrow raised as though to say, "I've been waiting for you to show some respect." Adrienne inhaled slowly, determined to remain calm, because part of her believed that if she let even a trickle of emotion out, it might all come pouring forth in an unstoppable flood. "Have a seat," Elaine said, gesturing to the couch. Adrienne placed her bag on the floor beside her and sat, her posture upright, her gaze unwavering. The hush that filled the space felt oppressive, as if the walls themselves were bracing for another confrontation. "I'll be brief," Elaine began, her tone clipped. "The papers have come through, I understand. Your arrangement with my son is nearing its end. Good for him. Good for all of us, I'd say." Adrienne forced herself not to react to the barb. She clasped her hands in her lap, pressing her nails lightly into her palms. "I'm aware," she responded, keeping her voice even. "And I'm doing what I can to finalize my move. Until then, I'll do my best to stay out of everyone's way." Elaine lowered her chin, regarding Adrienne with a near patronizing gaze. "That's wise. But we both know that staying out of the way has never been your strong suit, dear. You arrived here with your big smiles, your assumptions about how this family should be run, and frankly, I'm done pretending that your presence contributed anything of worth." Adrienne felt a surge of anger push at the boundaries of her composure. Yet she had expected these words. The old her would have bowed her head, searching for some way to appease Elaine. The new her was tired of bowing to an unpleasable tyrant. "I understand that's how you see it," Adrienne said quietly. "And that's fine. I won't ask for your approval. I'm only here long enough to collect what's mine and to secure what Michael legally owes me." Elaine's features stiffened. "Yours? I don't recall you contributing anything significant to the property. It was mine and my late husband's money that purchased this plot decades ago. Then Michael renovated it. As far as I'm concerned, you walked in with empty hands." Adrienne tightened her jaw. She remembered the early months of marriage when she had funneled her own modest savings into the renovation so that they could at least get the plumbing fixed, or the roof patched. She recalled living off one meager paycheck after another, throwing in every extra penny toward Michael's dream of turning this old place into a haven. She had records, receipts, all neatly organized. But at this moment, she simply nodded. "I know the truth of what I've put in," she said. "And more importantly, I know my rights. Michael will too once the lawyers are through with it. He might already know." Elaine scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Rights. Lawyers. You've grown quite sure of yourself, haven't you? It doesn't suit you." Adrienne felt the swirl of old insecurities, but she steadied herself. "Maybe it does," she answered. "Maybe it's the only way forward after being shoved aside time and time again." There was a tight silence. Adrienne heard the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each second echoing like a reminder of how fleeting time could be. When Elaine spoke again, her voice carried a sharper edge. "If you're waiting for Michael to hand over a nice little sum, or to suddenly break down in guilt, you're wasting your breath. Michael is my son. He's tied to me, not you. And once you're out of here, you can't slink back with your demands. Do you understand?" Adrienne lifted her chin. "I'm not here to slink," she responded with quiet firmness. "I'm here because I've been given permission by the law to stay until the settlement is finalized. Then I'll go." Elaine looked about ready to spew another tirade, but instead she shrugged, like a hawk sizing up prey it found too meager to bother with. "Fine. Enjoy your right to stay a bit longer. But don't think for a second that I'll make it easy for you. You have no idea what kind of trouble I can stir up when I'm truly motivated." That statement would have made Adrienne's heart pound with fear in years past. But after everything she had endured, cold silences, cunning remarks that eroded her self-esteem, she was done being intimidated. She offered a small smile, more out of exhaustion than anything else. "No," she said softly. "I think I do know. And that's exactly why I'm not scared anymore." Elaine narrowed her eyes, lips pursed. "Then get out of my sight," she said, almost spitting the words. "Go hide in your room or wherever it is you've been skulking. This conversation is over." Adrienne slipped her divorce papers back into her purse, stood, and walked away without another word. She passed through the hallway that led to the smaller wing of the house where she'd been sleeping alone since the separation. There was no lock on the door, something Elaine had insisted on from day one, claiming that families have no secrets from one another. Adrienne had once found it charming, Now it felt like just another violation. The hollow corridor smelled faintly of lemon polish mixed with the faint mustiness of old wood. Photographs still hung on the walls. Snapshots of Michael's childhood. Elaine beaming in her younger years, arms thrown around her husband's shoulders. None of them featured Adrienne. It was as if she'd never existed in these halls, a ghost passing through another family's story. Once inside the small bedroom, Adrienne carefully closed the door behind her. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, pressing her forehead against the wood for a moment. A swirl of memories threatened to rise. Bright days in the garden when she thought love could conquer any difference. Nights by the fireplace with Michael, and Elaine occasionally joining, though always with that undercurrent of scrutiny. She had been so convinced that if she stayed gentle and open-hearted, she could weave herself into the tapestry of this family. In retrospect, she realized it had never been about her failing. It had been about Elaine's refusal to share power, or to let Adrienne claim her own voice. Moving toward the bed, Adrienne brushed aside a small stack of folders she'd been collecting. They contained printouts of financial statements, home improvement invoices, and a list of everything she had purchased for the renovation, however small. Light fixtures, paint, mortar for the bricks, a new front door lock when the old one jammed. She'd also documented her own personal gifts to Elaine in the early days, expensive teas and embroidered tablecloths, tokens of respect and an eagerness to please. It might not amount to half the value of the house, but it was substantial enough that the courts would see reason for some equitable share. She skimmed a few of these documents and found herself recalling each moment she'd parted with the money, always believing she was contributing to a home that was partly hers. There was a twinge of bitterness now, as she recalled how Elaine had rolled her eyes at any suggestion Adrienne made for the house's improvement, dismissing them as childish illusions or female frivolities. Later, she would take credit for the ideas that turned out well, patting her own back while criticizing Adrienne's inexperience. The more Adrienne remembered, the more she felt her anger turning into a calmer, more empowering resolve. She deserved restitution, not just of money, but of dignity. At that thought, she heard a step in the hallway. She tensed, setting aside the papers. She expected Elaine's sharp rap on the door, but it didn't come. Instead, the footsteps hovered near her room, then retreated. The house was turning into a battlefield of surveillance. A wave of weariness swept over her, but she straightened her shoulders. If Elaine thought she could intimidate her into running off with nothing, she was sorely mistaken. Adrienne scrolled through her phone, checking the messages from her lawyer, who had assured her that the property negotiations would be addressed after a final inventory of valuables. It was a slow process, complicated by the fact that certain accounts were locked under Michael's name alone, and that Elaine claimed half of his finances were inherited family money. Adrienne's lawyer had predicted these tactics, telling her from the start that no one who tries to force you into invisibility will hand over anything willingly. She glanced at the phone screen and saw a new text from her friend Stella, who had been her rock throughout this ordeal. Stella had taken her in for a few nights when arguments in the house had become unbearable, reminding Adrienne that there was a life outside these oppressive walls. The message read, "Just checking in to make sure you're okay. Don't let them wear you down. You're stronger than you think." Adrienne breathed out a gentle sigh of gratitude as she typed back a quick message. "Thanks. I'm still here, but I'm not backing down." Her finger hovered over send, recalling all those times she had thought about giving up, just packing a bag and leaving everything behind. Now she couldn't fathom letting Elaine walk away unscathed, still perched on her throne of self-righteousness, convinced that Adrienne's only purpose was to serve and then disappear without a trace. After sending the text, she carefully organized her documents once more. placing them in a reinforced folder. If Elaine or Michael tried to rummage through her things, she wanted to be able to prove any tampering. Paranoia? Possibly. But life in this house had taught her that the polite illusions of trust could shatter at the slightest pressure. Turning toward the lone window, she noticed how the sun had retreated behind clouds heavy with the threat of evening rain. Her mind flicked back to the moment she had chosen to end the marriage. She'd been standing in the kitchen while Elaine berated her over some trivial matter. Adrienne's refusal to devote an entire Sunday to cleaning every corner of the house, if she recalled correctly. Michael sat on a bar stool, flipping through his phone, refusing to meet Adrienne's eyes. Elaine spat words about lazy, worthless wives, goading Adrienne for a reaction. Adrienne's gaze flicked to Michael, silently pleading with him to intervene, to stand up for her the way a loving partner would. But all he did was shrug and offer a vague, spineless protest that Elaine immediately squashed. That was the moment, that hush that followed, where Adrienne felt her last shred of hope dissolve. She realized she was alone in that home, in that marriage, entirely unprotected. She never again looked at Michael with the same love or trust. Now the memory made her close her eyes as she inhaled slowly. There would be no going back to that subservient role. If Elaine thought she could belittle her into submission again, she had chosen the wrong day and the wrong woman. Adrienne's entire spine seemed to stiffen with determination. She was going to see this through, no matter how ugly it got. A vibration on her phone pulled her from her reverie. It was a voicemail from Michael. She almost didn't bother to listen, but curiosity got the better of her. The message crackled to life. Adrienne, it's me. Look, about the settlement. I want us to end this without too much fuss. My mother is, well, you know how she is. Let's talk about it. Maybe we can avoid lawyers. Just call me back. A humorless smile tugged at the corner of Adrienne's mouth. So Michael was feeling the pinch, likely the result of having his mother breathing down his neck about preserving their family assets. Perhaps Elaine had complained that Adrienne was making too many rightful demands. Adrienne deleted the message. It was pointless to speak with him directly now. Everything would go through legal channels. That was the best guarantee she had against being tricked or coerced. She rose from the bed, running a hand over her face. The exhaustion from constant vigilance, the sense of always anticipating a new ambush, settled across her shoulders like a heavy cloak. But within that weariness, there sparked a small kernel of triumph. She had come too far to back down now. Crossing to the dresser, she opened the top drawer, retrieving an old journal. Inside were pages detailing every slight, every hidden remark, every forced act of subservience. She had never shown it to anyone, but writing it all down had been a lifeline. Flipping through these pages, she was reminded that the battle was not just for financial compensation. It was a battle for her dignity, for her right to exist without shame. Yes, some might say she was overreacting, or that she should simply take a lesser settlement to be rid of these people forever. But Adrienne knew that backing down now meant conceding to Elaine's worldview, enabling her to believe she had triumphed over yet another outsider. Adrienne was determined to break that cycle. Outside the window, the sky darkened, a slow roll of thunder rumbling across the horizon. Adrienne shut the journal, returning it to the drawer. She had all the evidence she needed, both in official paperwork and in her personal resolve. She could hear a distant murmur of voices from the main living room. Possibly Elaine and Michael were discussing her refusal to yield. Perhaps they were making new plans to undermine her. But she wouldn't succumb to that swirling negativity again. Straightening her blouse, she left the room and walked back through the corridor. Each step echoed as if the floor was affirming her presence. She refused to slink. If Elaine wanted a war, so be it. Adrienne had survived their relentless hostility. She was still standing, still possessed a fighting spirit. As she neared the living area, she saw a shadow cross the threshold. Michael emerged into the hallway, looking almost surprised that she'd approached. They regarded each other in silence for a moment. Then he cleared his throat. "Adrienne," he said softly, his voice devoid of its former smugness. "Can we maybe talk privately?" Adrienne crossed her arms over her chest. "About what?" His gaze flickered uncertainly. "Look, I know you're upset, but this is getting out of hand. My mother's. She's not handling this well." Adrienne found it almost laughable how he phrased it, as though Elaine's behavior was a mild inconvenience rather than a lethal wave of toxicity. "She never does," Adrienne replied. "So why would this be any different?" Michael swallowed and glanced over his shoulder, no doubt checking whether Elaine was within earshot. "I know we made mistakes," he said carefully, as if reading from a script. "I know it wasn't easy for you. But can't we just come to some arrangement? Something that doesn't involve lawyers picking apart our finances?" She tilted her head slightly, observing him. For a moment she considered if there was any sincerity behind his words. "Let me guess. Your mother wants to keep all the assets in the family, and you want me to just bow out quietly with minimal compensation. Is that it?" He winced. "It's not that simple. You know how she is about money. And the house is a house I paid into," Adrienne interjected, her voice firm. "Maybe not as much as she did, but enough. And I'm done giving in. So unless you plan to offer me something fair, there's nothing to discuss." Michael looked down, exhaling. Adrienne almost felt pity for him in that instant, caught between a domineering mother and his ex-wife's newfound tenacity. Almost. But then she remembered how easily he had let Elaine walk all over her, how he had left her to absorb insult after insult. He spoke again, more quietly. "I don't think you understand just how far my mother will go to protect what's hers." Adrienne's mouth set in a straight line. "Then she can go as far as she likes. I'm prepared. I have records. I have counsel. And I have nothing left to lose in this place." Michael hesitated for a few seconds, his eyes darting from her face to the floor. Finally, he stepped aside, letting her walk past him toward the living room. She felt no fear as she entered, only an electric tension in her chest. Elaine was perched on the sofa, her hands folded primly in her lap, eyes glittering with annoyance at seeing Adrienne stride in so confidently. In that moment, Adrienne understood she wasn't just fighting for property or money. She was fighting to reclaim everything they had tried to take from her: her dignity, her autonomy, and the belief that she was not just some small presence to be controlled or dismissed. This house might have once represented security and love in her mind, but that dream was shattered the day she realized she was living under someone else's tyranny. Now it served as the final battleground for her self-respect. She met Elaine's cold stare without flinching. Beyond the windows, the clouds thickened, a flash of lightning illuminating the gloom. Thunder soon followed, shaking the panes, as if marking the trembling edge of a storm that had been brewing for far too long. Adrienne felt a resonant determination surge in her chest. If that storm was coming, she would stand in its path without wavering. She'd been silent for too long, yearning for acceptance that was never given. Now she would accept herself fully, reclaim what was hers, and depart this house on her own terms, no matter what wrath Elaine hurled her way. She let her gaze sweep across the room, remembering every moment of silent suffering. Yes, she was done hiding. She was finished playing the role of a docile wife. And as the storm outside approached, Adrienne welcomed it, because she would meet it head on, unafraid. resolute in her right to exist as something more than an afterthought.